Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Angela Priestley. I'm the editorial director of Women's Agenda, and I'm here with Kristen Hilton. How are you, Kristen?
Hi, Angela. How you going?
Good, good. Thank you. Now, Kristen is a Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner, so it's amazing to have you here to talk about this topic. And happy flexible working day.
Thank you. Likewise, and to all your listeners and viewers.
Yes, so I assume that you do work flexibly in some shape or form. I know I certainly do, and in ways that I never could have imagined I would do over the past few months.
Yeah, well, I've been working from home, since we've been in lockdown here in Victoria. But even prior to that, I used to do 1 to 2 days at home during the week. So I've always had some sort of flexible work arrangement. But this is certainly, taken it to a new level.
Yeah, definitely taken it to a new level. I know it's been interesting just sort of finding work at all hours of the day when you can, in between kids or other caring responsibilities or whatever it is that people have going on. Even having housemates and things. I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago and she talked about how difficult it was to work in a kind of a full-time way at home during the pandemic when she was having to share kitchen table with other housemates and Wi-Fi access. So it's really, really tested a lot of boundaries. So thank you for everybody for joining us today. So feel free to shout out in the comments section to say hello, to tell us about how you work flexibly, maybe tell us about how you'd like to work flexibly, what you would imagine for flexible work moving forward, or any other comments that you'd like to share on the topic. So like many people these days, I really look forward to the point where I don't actually, where we don't actually need a flexible working day, where we don't have flexible work, we don't have full-time work or part-time work, we don't go to work. We simply do work in a way that works most effectively for ourselves and in a way that enables us to get fairly paid for the work that we do. So that would be the day that work really becomes something you do and not a place you go, and certainly not to the set hours that were created for a very different time. So as we've seen, corporate Australia has had to quickly embrace working from home during COVID-19, in some cases going kicking and screaming into 2020. And amazingly, the experiment has in many ways been remarkably successful, so much so that a number of employers are now declaring that staff may be able to work from home forever. So the work from home piece is in order in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, which is fantastic to see, although there are obviously issues that need to be contended with there. But working from home does not automatically mean workplace flexibility. And that distinction between working flexibly and working remotely is something we need to learn to grapple with right now, because if we don't normalise flexible work, then we're going to struggle to achieve workplace gender equality, and we're going to struggle to enable equal opportunity, given opportunity will continue to favour those who are already able to work those traditional hours. So once again, it's amazing to have you here with me and just to talk about these issues. I wanted to just start with what you've noticed at the Commission over the past few months during the pandemic. Has there been an uptick on people looking to find out about their workplace rights, particularly around flexible work?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And I'll also just mention, so I'm here in Victoria, so we're seeing the statistics and data that we're seeing are based on what's happening here in Victoria. But speaking to my federal and other state and territory colleagues, there's similarities happening across the country. So in the last couple of months, really, since we started going into a restricted living mode, I suppose, we've seen an increase in the number of inquiries and complaints in relation to what workers' or employees' rights are, but also employers trying to find out what their obligations are under the pieces of legislation that govern flexible work. We've had about 570 inquiries over the last couple of months, just about sort of parental and carer discrimination and people who want to work flexibly but are not being allowed to work flexibly, and even during this pandemic. So our approach to that is, and this is what we really encourage people to do, is to contact us early, because often inquiries that will become sort of formalised complaints and go through a dispute resolution process, at that point the employment relationship is often soured, it's kind of irrevocably broken, and people are looking at some sort of compensation or some sort of recognition that what happened to them was a form of discrimination. What we want to do is catch those disputes or those differences early so that we can act as an independent third party and try and get the employee and the employer to come to a beneficial flexible working arrangement.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you'd be able to share in terms of sort of any examples of that when you talked about parent and carer discrimination particularly, which is really disappointing to hear that happening during a pandemic when obviously people had no choice but to take on caring responsibilities and their workplaces needed to adapt accordingly. Are there any examples you could share of what sorts of things people were bringing up?
Yeah, so we had a woman recently who called. She was from a manufacturing company. She did office work within that company. She wanted to drop her days from 5 to 4. She had school children who were at home, and she wasn't allowed to do a day a week from home. So it's that kind of thing. And I think, perhaps we imagine that possibly corporate Australia is further and is probably further ahead, or maybe the public sector is further ahead than many other industries that are still have a lot of assumptions about what flexible work is and what employees' entitlements are. We also have men who face carer and parent discrimination. And there's a lot of research that suggests that actually men have their requests for parental leave, not just parental leave, but flexible working arrangements denied twice as often as women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting because we do see this stigma. That just goes to the fact that there is still a great deal of stigma that's attached to flexible working arrangements, whether that's working from home or working part-time. And that I think we've got to a point where it's accepted that many women, particularly after returning back into the workforce after parental leave, for example, might want to work flexibly. But often that is accommodated, often at more of a cost to the employee than the employer, I would say. And, we hear so many examples, and I know myself, of, saying that you'll come back 3 days actually working 5. So being paid 3 days a week, but working 5 days a week, because the old paradigm of work was you turn up at a certain time and you're there until a certain time. And I think there's still sort of a lack of trust or a lack of confidence from some employees about what work can be done at home or what work can be done outside of the view of normal working hours. And the only way I think in which we're going to be able to take some of the benefits of this pretty unusual period, particularly in the way in which it sort of jolted us into remote working, is to really question some of those assumptions that we still have about women and men wanting to work flexibly.
Yeah, the normalisation of flexible work.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you think? I mean, do you have any ideas what is behind an employer's concerns or fears or why, say, the example that you gave of the woman working in manufacturing, what might be behind them saying no when it was office work and it was clearly she'd be able to do that from home and I mean, clearly she needed to have the 4 out of 5 days during those school during this period of the pandemic. So what would be, I don't know, any ideas on why employers are still holding back from that?
Yeah, and I think it might not be even particularly well, I mean, I think it's a bias or an assumption that might not even be articulated through the employer or through a company policy. And that is that I want to keep eyes on my employees. I want to know what they're doing. I want to make sure that they're being productive. And I don't perhaps trust them. And so I think that's really where it does come from. And to be able to set up a mutually beneficial, flexible working arrangement, there does have to be trust, confidence, and creativity in those working arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also moving away from this idea that being at work from 8 until 8:30 or 9 till 5:30 means that you are the most productive worker.
Mm-hmm.
Because and so many times, and again, I see it myself as an employer, some of the most productive, engaged, creative people are the ones who are working in a part-time capacity, or are the ones who are sometimes working from home, so there's some time out of the office. They're not necessarily the ones that are turning up for work, you know, in that sort of regular traditional work rhythm. And I think we need to move away from this idea that, you know, clocking on and clocking off means that that's the way in which a productive workplace runs. And lots of companies have embraced that. Of course, there are challenges around, you know, some organisations that are less perhaps office-based. But you know, we've worked, for example, with Victoria Police, a really deeply entrenched organisation with very fixed ideas about what men and women can and can't do and what the workplace looks like. We worked with them for about 4 years around a range of sort of gender equality initiatives. And one of them we said was, you will not get the value and you will not attract women into your organisation in the way you should be, or get the most out of your male employees until you come up with a less rigid workplace model. And over the last 18 months, their uptake of flexible work has increased by 20%. And the great result is that 11% of that 20% is men. And the stories that you hear now from men who are working more flexibly in that organisation are, you know, they're such great stories to sell the idea and the promise of flexible work, because they're more engaged, they're more financially secure. They're not having to do sort of 4 days or try and work 5 days in 4, because they can do a day from home. So there's so many benefits to flexible work, but I think we still have a long way to go in terms of shifting culture and shifting assumptions about why it can be a good thing.
Yeah. With that example, did they set a target of that 20%? Did they go to that sort of level and thinking, hey, this is where we'd like to end up?
Yeah, they've set targets. They've now set targets around a whole lot of gender equality measures. And one of the things about Victoria Police is that they're very good at collecting data. And so it's really interesting actually to see what policies and practices they've put in place to create that sort of change. And it's not just policy, it's actually been a whole, you know, cultural shift, if you like. And it's still going to take them some time to get there. But they are measuring all of that now. And they're also, one of the things that we recommended was, don't just measure how many people or how many men, how many women are engaged in flexible work arrangements, measure how many requests you get. And how many times those requests are denied. Because often what we see is that, you know, you can have the best flexible working policy in your organisation, and you can promote stories about flexible working arrangements, but often it will come down to the conversation that you have with your manager. And that's where we think a lot of the work still needs to be done, because it can be a challenging and kind of confronting conversation for an employee to have. And we do a lot of work actually role-playing what these conversations look like with employees and employers, to break down some of those assumptions that you were talking about earlier, Angela. Like, what is it really that you're scared about? Like, do you think the person's not going to perform? Well, that's a performance issue. It's not a flexible work issue. And trying to separate those two things out. But measuring, I think, you know, what parts of the organisation are doing flexible work well, what parts aren't, who's taking it up and who isn't, helps you get a better picture of, well, what are still some of the obstacles that are presenting themselves, whether they're structural or whether they're attitudinal in our workplace.
Okay, just a reminder that we'd love you to, we can see that you're out there, but it's quiet on the chat line. So we'd love it if you let us know any questions that you have about flexible work. This is an incredible opportunity to ask those questions right now about your rights on flexible work. And also just to shout out and let us know how you work flexibly, how you like to work flexibly. You're welcome just to let us know where you're actually dialing in from today, but we'd love to see some discussion there. But on that, so I wanted to ask, I mean, what are our rights on requesting for flexible work?
It's a really good question. So there are sort of two main pieces of legislation. One is the Fair Work Act, and under the Fair Work Act, there are a bunch of different employees, so parents and carers, people with a disability, people who have experienced family violence, who are able to request flexible work. So there's not a right to flexible work, but there's a right to request it. And then it's incumbent upon your employer to put in writing the reasons why you can or why you can't have that flexible working arrangement. And to deny it, essentially they have to say that it's not, there are reasonable grounds or reasonable business grounds upon which the arrangement won't work. So people do access the Fair Work Commission, which has jurisdiction over that act. It can sometimes be a bit of a daunting experience. You know, and if you get to the point where you're at Fair Work, obviously something has gone wrong, pretty wrong, in the conversation that you've had with your manager about flexible working arrangements. Mm. And then there are protections under Discrimination Acts. So here in Victoria, and there are similar provisions in other state, territory and federal legislation, an employer can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their parental or caring responsibilities, and has to consider a request to flexible work and a request to flexible working arrangements. And where that doesn't happen, an organisation like ours, so the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, can bring those two parties together, and earlier on is better than, you know, we're at the point where it just gets pretty unworkable, to try and work out what a good flexible working arrangement looks like. And you know, this is the thing, that even though we talk much more about flexible work, and it is definitely more of a reality, particularly for women, there are still employees that don't have a great awareness of what their rights are or how to go about asserting them. And there are still lots of employers who either don't know or want to subvert their obligations because they think it's too complicated to put a flexible working arrangement in place. And I think what we've been going through now has been this great proof of concept that men and women can work from home, but these are not normal conditions either. I mean, Angela and I were talking about before we went online, we've had 3 kids at home during this period. So I wouldn't want my flexible working arrangements in the future.
On this period, that was my worry, that everyone sees
necessarily to be based on this.
Like, this is not the experiment. This is, yeah, we can't assess productivity based on this last few months. And even if you don't have kids at home, I mean, you might be, there's other factors in this. It's been emotionally difficult this period. You might have other caring responsibilities. It's not a normal time. And there's certainly not even a new normal within this. We don't know what this is going to look like over the next few months. So,
and the other thing I think to be conscious of is it's already women that have felt the brunt of job losses and reduction in hours. The last thing that you would want is that employers are using the concept of flexibility to actually reduce people's hours.
Yes.
You know, so going from 5 days to 3 days or 4 to 2, that's not what flexible working arrangements are about.
Yeah, we also saw, I mean, a drop in, I'm not going to get these figures right, but we've published this on Women's Agenda. So that there was more women than men have been found to have lost jobs and have had hours cut back. But there's also been a drop in women looking for work as well during that.
Yes.
I think it suggests that maybe that they didn't think that they would get the flexibility they need.
I think it's around 50% who have said that they won't look for work during this time or can't look for work during this time. And you know, with changes to childcare as well, it's going to make it even more difficult. People will start to do the sums. Is it worth me going back to work at this point? And you know, that has consequences not just for the period of here and now, but also for wage inequality, which is, you know, still currently at 14% in this country. And then what the impact is on your superannuation when you retire, but also like chunks of time out of the workplace make it very difficult to get back in it.
So there's lots of comments and questions now coming through. I think they're only coming through to us panelists at the moment, which is fine. So yeah, if you do want to ask anything anonymously, you can put it in the Q&A box, and there's a few questions there, and there's also quite a few pieces here that have come again just to the panelists. So I'd like to just share a bit of experience from my mother's group. And so from my first child, and I watched some women experience pregnancy discrimination and lose jobs while they're in paid parental leave. And there was also the issue of having some level of flexibility, and this came up a lot. You've got some level of flexibility, but you want to go and apply for a new role, you want to go and do something different, you want to take a step up in your career, but the first thing on your mind is, well, will I be able to have that flexibility, or will I need to go and do it full-time in a traditional way to prove myself? Do you have any advice for people around that? I mean, when they're looking for work, when they can actually or should try to, bring up the subject of being able to work flexibly?
Yeah, I think they should do it as early as they can. I mean, I know that sometimes that's really difficult to do, but so many more employers are advertising that there are all roles flex, or talk to us about what your flexible working arrangements want to be. And I think the earlier you negotiate around something like that and try and be confident in those negotiations, the better it is, because I think the situation where, you say, well, I'll start full time and they'll see that I'm irreplaceable, or I'll be able to prove my value in that organisation, and then I can gradually go back to 4 days. You will end up being paid for 4 days and working 5, because that's where you sort of pitch your productivity and your value. So we actually want employers, and this is as much as about those people who can make employment decisions, and those people who can attract and retain people who are confident and assured of their value enough to be able to say, I need to balance my caring responsibilities and my working commitments, and I can do that in this way. And I think being proactive about how you would do that, so sometimes giving the employer an example of how that might work, because not all employers, are as progressive as each other. So actually being, going with the example or going with the plan, I think is really helpful in perhaps trying to dissuade some of those assumptions that employers might have. But I think again now, and I guess this is what, there's a bit of a double-edged or two sides of the coin to this, because on the one hand, we've seen that COVID-19 has forced us to be more innovative and more creative and more flexible in our working arrangements, and that there's lots of employers now that are going, we're not going to return to what was once considered normal. We are going to take the best things out of this period and listen to our employees and try and incorporate those in the workplace. But on the same hand, we're in this period of real economic uncertainty. Women have already had a disproportionate impact on their incomes and working hours. So we're nervous, we're anxious about that might mean that women will accept conditions or arrangements that even 18 months ago, they might have said, I'm not going to put up with that. Or actually I should, I want wage equality and I'm going to ask about that when I go into this role. So we're at this point where we really don't want to turn back some of those gains that we have made. So, a lot of it though is incumbent upon employers understanding what their obligations are.
Okay, I want to get to some of these questions, but the first one is from Nicole asking about the concept of flexible, if it's actually being misunderstood. So should love to hear a definition. And we spoke about it a little bit at the top of the conversation, noting that it's not actually working from home. And I certainly have my ideas of what flexible work is. I'm working in an office by myself at the moment, but I consider my day to day to be working flexibly, as I'll work at different points according to things that I need to do. But what's your definition of what flexible work actually means?
It's a really good question, because it's not just working from home. It also encompasses part-time work. It might mean a change in the number of the way in which you work a working week. So you might do 4 long days, so a compressed working week. It might also be a job share arrangement. It might be a mix of working remotely or from the office. So it can be a range of all of those sorts of things, rather than just remote working, which is what we've been doing, in the last couple of months.
Okay. So it includes part-time work.
It definitely includes part-time work. It also includes job share.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that particularly in more senior positions, employers have struggled to get their heads around how people could share a role, but I've seen it work fantastically.
Okay, so question from Emma, which I guess follows on from this, but what are some of the more creative, flexible work arrangements that you've seen? So obviously we talked about 4 days, part-time, that sort of thing, modified hours. Is there anything else that stands out in terms of flexible work?
Yeah, I think, the job share is a really good one as well. So where there is a particular role and two people have shared it, that can also be classified as a flexible working arrangement. And sometimes people apply for jobs on that basis.
Yep.
But I think also some of the creativity comes from how the organisation supports workers who are working flexibly. So how they continue to keep them connected, how you make sure that you have staff meetings on a particular day, or your staff meetings are recorded, or people don't feel like they're losing out because they're not in the office all of the time. And I think that's a really important thing to come out of this period as well. I mean, I used to work a day or two from home, but I never had the ability really, unless, Skype for Business had decided to work on a particular day, of holding stakeholder meetings with 7 people from my home office, or holding meetings with the team at work, and that's all possible now. So part of it also is about being creative with the way in which you use technology, and make sure that technology and support is part of your flexible work environment.
And that's really the key to making it so much more inclusive. And I think that's what you mentioned taking the good bits from this period, and that's one good bit that I think a lot of organisations genuinely will take from this, is where they have looked at organising meetings virtually. And I know with the clients that we work with, we've started doing a lot more virtual meetings, and I think we'll probably continue that. And it does make it so much easier for our very small team who have parental responsibilities, or are studying, or whatever it is. And I see that in other organisations as well, where they've actually set up regular weekly virtual meetings, which if they'd been done in person, they may have taken a ridiculous amount of time, and it could have resulted in people having to miss out because they needed to work from home that day, or feeling like they needed to go in just for that meeting. But they've made it virtual, and it's working in a lot of cases. So I hope that
I think that's a really good point, because I think sometimes the isolation that people who might be working flexibly or part-time feel can change as a result of more people doing it.
Okay, so there's a few scenario-like questions, which I'm going to try and get to, because they might relate to people's personal experience. So I'll try and do this the best way that we can. But so there's somebody who's talking about a person who has been allowed begrudgingly to work part-time, but has had the renewal of their contract held over them, saying unofficially that their unwillingness to go full-time is preventing them from providing an offer of employment. So this person has parental responsibility, and this questioner is asking if this constitutes discrimination.
Yeah, on the face of it, quite possibly. I mean, it's a bit like, I couldn't give you a definitive answer without seeing the details, but my best advice is to call the Commission. I can give you the number. Would that be helpful? It's 1300 292 153, or there are details on and we do web chat and inquiry-based forms. But that's the type of thing that we do see, where negotiations or access to promotion or access to a higher pay is predicated on someone moving from part-time to full-time.
Okay. And so if somebody's not in Victoria, can they still contact that number, or
if they're not in Victoria, then it's best to go to your equivalent state or territory commission. So there's a body that's similar to ours. Sometimes our legislation is a bit different in every state or territory, or to the Fair Work Act or the Fair Work Commission website. That also has really good information on there too.
Okay. Another question here from Eva, asking if we need to look at how work is valued. And I really firmly do believe that we need to look at how work is valued. So often it's by hours. So should we get a push more to see working on valuing jobs on their content where feasible, not time spent on them? And I think this is can be the challenge for managers, but it is a sign of a good manager if they're able to figure out how a role works according to the tasks that are required to get done, as opposed to saying, hey, this relies on somebody sitting at this desk for 40 hours a week.
Absolutely. And some of those things are sort of perceptions or attitudes, and some of them are actually built in to the economics of the business. So if you think about financial services or law firms, accountancy firms, where you have to bill a certain amount of hours, and often your track to promotion will be based on how much you bill, which goes to how you calculate your time, essentially, and you have to account pretty much for every minute. Now that way of measuring work value is extremely rigid, and there are all sorts of reasons why that prevents an equal or inclusive workplace. And there are a bunch of law firms and accountancy firms that have moved away from that model now, which are actually less about calculating the minutes that you work or the 8-minute blocks, and more about putting a value on the service that you deliver as opposed to the minutes that you deliver. Yeah. But some of those things are still built into workplaces, which makes it really difficult to overcome.
Yeah, that time-based billing especially. Yeah. I used to be a legal reporter, and so I recall writing about the firms that were so innovative at the time to move away from time-based billing. And I can say that when we published those pieces on our website, they were the pieces that lawyers wanted to go and read, because it's just what so many wanted, particularly young lawyers.
Absolutely. I remember doing a lot of work with Victoria Police, and one of their big barriers to women entering the workforce, entering Victoria Police and other forces, was the physical testing. And it wasn't until a few years ago that this huge wall that men and women had to scale in their physical testing entry test was changed, and they lowered it, and that meant that a whole lot more good men and women were coming into the police force. And that was based on what you actually needed to do at that particular time. And I spoke to an accountancy firm recently, and they said, what do you think our 6-foot wall is? And one of the female partners said, it's billing. That's the kind of invisible thing that's holding us back. And so I think in this environment where kind of everything is up for grabs, well, a lot is up for grabs, we need to really look at the structures and the policies and the assumptions that are holding people in rigid work paradigms. And I say this in recognition of the fact that this is much easier for white-collar workers than it is for people who are in caring work. And I don't think, going back to the question, we need to completely reassess how we value caring work in this country as well.
Yeah. So following on from that, so Joseph has got a question saying, when we talk a lot about flexible roles, in many cases we're really describing a rigid but non-traditional arrangement, which is, yeah, absolutely. They're asking for tips or examples of truly flexible jobs which are only defined by productivity and not hours. I can say that we do that we've got a small publishing team here, and the work really is defined by productivity because we have a deadline. So it makes it very easy in the sense that it's quite clear what everyone's doing. And, once we do that, we take a break. And I know that I work in a way that, like Eva suggested, I work in a way that means that I can break up my day into little pockets of work according to things that I need to do or kids that I need to pick up. So do you have any tips or examples of truly flexible jobs?
Well, that's less about the flexibility comes as a result of what you value in your employees, I suppose. And if that is that there is a agreed expectation about what an employer expects of you and what you will deliver, that is not about time spent in the office, and it's not about, widgets, if you like. It's about producing certain content, or it's about, you agree those sorts of things between employers and employees. And I think the flexibility comes from how you achieve those. So if you can agree on what work needs to get done, and then have a more open conversation around how we do that, how do we get to that point, that's the kind of good conversations that you want to be having as an organisation. Medibank have done some great work, just as an Australian example, in really changing their culture around going from, you know, widget counting to activity-based employment.
Okay. Okay, so a great question here from Jane, who sounds like she's in a management capacity or maybe as an employer herself, talking about, yep, we see the benefits of working from home as well as other flexibility options, and she agrees with them. But in order to provide a balanced business case to an executive team, it's important to consider the costs and risks as well. So what do you consider the main risks and costs associated with increased flexibility opportunities? She says that she wants to be prepared for those responses.
Yeah, I mean, there's often some initial cost in, maybe it's about technology or ensuring that people can work from home. But look, all of the studies that I have seen, and there's a lot of research that has come out around flexible work, have actually drawn on the cost saving to an organisation that truly values and has in place flexible work arrangements. NAS Group, which is I think they're national, but they recently did a study. They did a cost benefit analysis of flexible work of 3 quite different organisations. One was a public authority that was a water organisation, a hospital, and then I think it was a retail organisation as well. And all of them saved money when they brought in truly flexible working arrangements. It varied from about I think about 1% to 5% overall, but there were savings, and some of those savings relate to not just productivity, but also lack of absenteeism, lack of presenteeism, employers staying longer. So, you know, all of the costs in re-recruiting and retraining, they were reduced. So I think, yes, of course, it's not without investment, and it's not without a shift in understanding and a shift in perhaps some sort of setting up costs, and you know, a different style of management as well. But all of the research that I have seen is that flexible work, when managed properly and when done in trust and confidence, is actually not just an employee benefit, but it's also an organisational financial benefit.
This might not be your area, but it is in terms of costs, like OHS costs. Are there increases there that?
Yeah, look, I couldn't give you specifics on that, but that's definitely, you know, that's definitely things for managers and employers to take into consideration. What are their responsibilities for people working at home? What's the ergonomic setup, for example? And, you know, I know that because we've had to go into this remote working period so quickly, not all of those things have been extremely well thought through. So yeah, that's an issue. But it also means, you know, if you have enough of the workforce working flexibly, the whole infrastructure of your business changes. You know, so we're seeing some organisations talking about, we don't need as much office space. We don't need as much city office space, for example. So they're thinking about sort of hub offices as well in areas that might not be as expensive. So look, it does require a new way of thinking and a creative way of thinking, but I think it's here for the long term. And, you know, so the advice to both employees and employers is to understand what the law says and then think about how it works best in your organisation that's going to benefit everyone.
I mean, the cost savings on working from home as one part of flexible work are just huge. I mean, I can't see these businesses just sort of leaving their offices empty, but yeah. I mean, I have heard from at least one large office in Sydney saying just over the weekend that, you know, they had intended on moving to an office that was twice the size because they were growing. You know, they've got hundreds of staff there. They were vehemently against any form of working from home at all. Of course, all their staff are now working from home, and they're now, or, you know, we might do like people come in twice a week or something. So it just, it's incredible how quickly that switch can shift, where, you know, you give it a go and you see the potential and the cost savings. And I dare say, in terms of savings, if more companies enabled flexible work, you could also look at getting a greater access to talent as well, particularly when it comes to those who are not necessarily in an easy commute from the city and who might really benefit from having flexibility around when they travel to work or how many days they actually do travel to work. So there's lots of I mean, we all know there's lots of benefits there.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, we've talked a lot about sort of the benefits for women. There are huge benefits for men, and men have to be a part of this conversation, but also for workers who don't find a traditional workplace particularly easy to navigate for all sorts of reasons, whether that's because they're living with a disability or they experience other types of discrimination in the workplace. So, I think we need to think about how actually flexible working can make workplaces more inclusive.
Another point out of this pandemic period, and I mean, it relates to flexible work somewhat, but I do think we'll see a lot less business travel going forward as well. And I think that is enabling a form of flexibility in itself, that all of a sudden we're thinking, those business trips, those interstate conferences that need to go and do those meetings in different capital meetings, wherever it was, there is this acceptance that, hey, maybe that's not actually that necessary. And that just goes to so many other benefits. Obviously, it's not great for the airline industry, but
it's great for climate change.
It's excellent for climate change, lower emissions, and just that people can have more time to be at home and be themselves elsewhere. Great question from Prue here, and she says that as we approach performance appraisal time, what would be your advice to those who have had to access a great amount of flexibility to accommodate caring responsibilities during this period? Caring responsibilities mitigated against recency bias. So I haven't read this question very well, but yes, what would be, this is performance appraisal time. Do you have any advice for this? Because it has, like we said, it hasn't been necessarily a productive period for the last few months. It's not really a way that the way you work should have been measured during this time. It's been pretty difficult.
I guess Prue's talking about people who have had to access leave and therefore maybe their contribution has changed during that period, and that might be viewed negatively in a performance appraisal. So again, I think, if that is happening, or if there is a risk of that happening, seek early advice about that, because you are entitled to leave. And we've heard of some employees who have been denied leave during this period, and others who have been forced to take it. And I understand that, particularly with small and medium businesses, it's been such a difficult time, and there's many that have gone above and beyond to make sure that they're sort of retaining their staff in some way or looking after their staff. But if you feel like you are being penalised, stigmatised or discriminated against on the basis of having to take leave or to change the way in which you're working during a global pandemic because you have caring responsibilities, that might be for an older relative, it might be for a partner or children, then please get early advice if it looks like the conversation is going that way. And even if you can just get some tips about how to have a more practical conversation with your employer about that, that's really useful.
Okay, so question here from Steph asking about, mention that they're 100% remote. This is Steph from Beam Australia, and they work part-time 3 days a week. So that you mentioned senior roles and flexibility, including part-time and job share. What are some of the challenges you're hearing as to why employers and organisations aren't as open to this? And this, I think the point about senior roles is so important. We haven't really spoken about it, but we actually need to see those senior leaders actually working flexibly. And that means actually really working flexibly, not leaving it, 4 o'clock one day a week to pick up the kids from after school care or something. Like we need to see that actively demonstrated. But do you hear organisations actively pushing against enabling it for senior leadership positions?
Well, the organisations that really do it well are role modelling it. And I think without that sort of leadership from the top across a number of different roles, then those kind of rigid assumptions never really undo, I suppose. So, and it's more than, as you say, someone just posting on Yammer a picture of them at their child's sports day. It's actually about a different way of contributing to work and contributing to your home life. And I think it can be really easy to be distrusting of an organisation's policy or change or culture if you're not seeing that role modelled at the very top. Or if there then becomes sort of, what happens is you get this hierarchy of importance that creeps in, which is, my job is so important that I cannot work flexibly. And that sort of entrenches that stigma that's there in the first place, which is you won't be valued as highly if you work flexibly, or if you work part-time, or if you're in a job share arrangement. So if the leader of an organisation or senior people in the organisation can show that I take my work really seriously, I contribute a lot to the organisation, but I don't need to be there 40 hours a week. And I can balance, not necessarily balance, but I can manage other things in my life because of the flexibility that the organisation affords me. That's where you're going to see the real attitudinal shift in the organisation.
Okay. Another question here, I guess it's a personal scenario situation of somebody asking if it would be reasonable to request to work from home 4 days and only go into the office 1 day. And they've put here post-COVID safe. So it might be in the context of preferring to remain safe during this period, but what's reasonable at the moment, and what will be reasonable, say, this time next year?
It's a really evasive lawyer answer. It depends. So it kind of depends on how your workplace is set up. So, for example, if you've got a lot of people in a small workplace, then there are certain, you'd certainly have grounds for feeling like the workplace is going to be an unsafe place to go because of the use of communal spaces, toilets, or, if there are lifts in the building. So, if you put in a formal request for that and it was denied, the employer has to give you good grounds, reasonable grounds upon which the request is denied. And I think that there will be certainly a different level of openness and tolerance for those sorts of requests in this environment. And I guess this is the point that we can show, and it's demonstrated, and we're about to actually do a survey of about 2,000 Victorians, which is looking at the benefits or the obstacles to flexible work, because there are some real challenges around how much people are working flexibly as well, and how people are trying to cram in productivity into periods where they are still caring for people at home. We've heard of people getting up at 4 a.m. to try and get work done before online school starts. So, that situation has changed a bit now and has eased a bit. But we also have to be aware of some of the challenges at working from home.
Yeah, I relate to the 4 a.m. situation.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to model the future of flexible work on the pandemic.
No, we don't. But at the same time, it is for me personally, and this is, everyone works differently, and I cannot do any work after dinner. I find that really difficult. So if I need to catch up, I prefer to just be waking up early and trying to do it in the morning. And understandably, some people would absolutely hate that, and that is not right for them. But this is when it comes back to the conversation about flexible work. It's also about trying to work at a time that is that really enables you to do your best work as well. And only we personally know that, and we're not all kind of scheduled to be able to do that between 9 and 5.
That's right. Exactly.
But yeah, speaking of the overwork thing, I think this is a great question from Stacey, and then I think I might do one more, and we will have to close up because we're trying to keep to 45 minutes. But Stacey notes that she's an advocate for flexible work, but notes the danger of work intensity, especially in this environment, which can impact employees' well-being. So any tips or strategies you have for employees and employers in that case?
Yeah, I think if I can just tell you what we've been doing during this time, we've been checking in much more regularly than probably we would have in a normal office working environment, just about how people are going. And it is worrying, when you see people sending emails at very unusual times. And I think because this has been such an extraordinary time, there's kind of an allowance that you are looking after yourself and moderating your working hours to suit your circumstances. And people have got really, really hard circumstances at the moment. But I think alongside what is happening now, which is, high degree of economic insecurity, just a huge period of change, and change that's happening really, really rapidly, that understanding how not just your organisation is faring, but how individuals within your team or within your organisation are faring is really, really important. Because, look, some people have thrived in the remote working scenario, and other people, particularly those people for whom home is not particularly safe, or, it's not easy to work at home, or they actually need the socialisation of the workplace and the energy of the workplace. Working from home can be quite a lonely and isolating experience as well. So the best, I think, advice for employers is to understand, before you put in what your new flexible working arrangements are, listen to your staff. It's one thing about what works for you, but listen to what the experience of your employees has been during this time, and take the opportunity to think about, well, how do we make this, a productive and innovative, but also a really supportive organisation into the future.
And this really is an opportunity where you could do that kind of to the extreme almost.
Yeah.
You take this time. And I saw an example from Future Super. I think they've got around 40 employees or so, and they had done something where they had, all their staff were working from home. They'd provided an allowance for all staff to go and, make their office or their home office or home space to look as they wanted to. I mean, that might be getting a new chair or a nice few plants or whatever it is. But they'd also actually reduced the number of hours that staff were working. So they took off a day, an hour or so each day, to basically account for the fact that, for the pandemic and things that are going on, but also for the fact that they're working from home, that they may end up putting in extra hours and bits and pieces here, because that's the thing with flexible work, is it's so flexible that you can keep working continuously.
That's right.
Which is not always a good thing.
And it does blur those boundaries between your work life and your home life, if they were, strict boundaries for you. I think there's a lot to learn about how to make sure these sorts of arrangements endure for both employees and employers. But I like that idea of, people are talking about the 4-day week as well. I know that's a conversation that's being had in New Zealand, and there are even a couple of Australian companies that are looking at it now.
Yeah, the 4-day week.
Advocating for the 4-day school week at the same time. So
yeah, the 4-day school week would certainly be nice. But it's, even without the 4-day school week, you can still see the benefits of a 4-day week if you've got an extra day when you can get life admin and things like that organised. I do think, in New Zealand's case with Jacinda Ardern slating the idea of the 4-day work week, it's you can definitely see the benefits to the local tourism during this period, and maybe it's worthwhile organisations seeing what they can do, say, over the school holiday period or something, and seeing what they might be able to offer staff to try and really encourage them to go and take those short trips within their state or wherever is safe to go. So any final points? I'm mindful that we're kind of well over time. There's still a few things that we didn't get to, but we'll see what we can do to try and get some of these things answered. But any other final remarks that you'd like to share?
Oh, look, I think that, this is an opportunity, and there are so many people who are now working from home who would never have countenanced before that possibility. Like, even within I have to say most of them are male, but even within my sort of immediate contacts, I know that there are some people who would have been really resistant to the idea of working from home and how that would have been viewed by their employer. And so I think if we have shifted that, that's been incredibly important, not just for women, but also for men. And I think the other thing that COVID has probably brought into sharp relief is what we value. And that is not, at the end of the day, necessarily how many hours you have worked in a week, or how many, what your attendance at the office have been. It's meaningful work, it's connection with friends and family. It's about a sense of contribution and belonging. And there are a whole bunch of ways in which we can do that in a more creative and sustained way. And I really hope that that's what we take into those values are what we take into the world of work into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for participating from home, and good luck with your future conversations on workplace flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you.